Deformation is a key idea when used in talking about the lithosphere. So the two things to keep in mind are that it undergoes elastic deformation after a long period of time, which is to say that it deforms, but it can also be restored back to its previous position, and this usually occurs under very high pressures and temperatures, and it undergoes brittle failure, which brittle I think we've talked about sometime in the past on this channel. A brittle failure is just a sudden, like, kind of with a fault, like a snap. You know, just imagine anything you would describe as brittle. I don't know, maybe you've got a very brittle, gee, I don't know. What do we describe as brittle? Whatever, that doesn't matter too much. Elastic deformation, brittle failure, that's what those are, and that's what the lithosphere is known to undergo. And one final piece here that gets into a little bit about the next layer we'll talk about is the asthenosphere, and the boundary between these two is called the lithosphere-asthenosphere boundary, very appropriately named. So that'd just be right there. That is the lower boundary of the lithosphere. The upper is, of course, the surface of the Earth. And of course we'll go into more detail on the asthenosphere in the next video. Oh, actually I do have one more point to talk about real quick, and that is, similar to the crust, the lithosphere can be divided into oceanic lithosphere and continental lithosphere. So we've got oceanic and continental. And if you watched my crust video, then many of the pieces that we talk about with oceanic and continental crust remain true for the lithosphere. Oceanic lithosphere is, of course, younger, thinner, and more dense slightly by about like 0.2 grams per centimeter cubed or something like that. It's not much, but it does make a difference. More dense. Continental lithosphere is older, thicker, and less dense. And just to give you a sense of scale of how much the lithosphere, the rigid part of the mantle, the uppermost rigid piece of the mantle, adds to the crust when we classify it as the lithosphere. You'll recall that continental crust is usually about 50 kilometers at most. Well, the lithosphere goes to anywhere between usually around 50 kilometers through 250 kilometers deep. And oceanic, you'll recall, that's usually on its own about 10 kilometers thick at the thickest. This is usually around 10 kilometers through, usually more around 150 kilometers thick. So yeah, even the rigid piece of the mantle is a lot thicker than the crust, and you can tell just by looking at these two very solid pieces of the Earth. When combining them together, a very small portion of this entire thickness and this entire thickness is actually the crust. Actually, yeah, those are correct. But as far as oceanic crust goes, or oceanic lithosphere, excuse me, goes, at mid-ocean ridges, it can only be as thick as the oceanic crust is, because that's where you have the magma from the mantle rising up into the oceans at mid-ocean ridges. So just remember that that's where you have pretty much a direct connection between the crust and the flowing part of the mantle. But we still call it the lithosphere because it is still the crust still is a piece of the lithosphere nonetheless, and it still is solid and rigid. It's just very, very thin lithosphere at that point. And And that's all I really wanted to talk about as far as the lithosphere goes. The next video will be on the asthenosphere. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hopefully it was informative. Otherwise, good review. Hope you're having a fantastic day, and I'll see you all in the next video. Ciao.